So congratulations, Andrew. One of the things that not many filmmakers can really attest to is being able to continue the legacy of a franchise, the Reef, two films. Technically, that's a franchise of sorts in modern day. How does it feel, first of all, to be able to continue the storytelling, with you as with your script, with your direction, even though it's a different crew, which we'll get to. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's great to be able to be in a position where you have a lot of creative say. Obviously, being the writer and the director and a producer, I get on this one, I get to have a lot of say. And so that's really, really lovely because, there are limitations on the film through budget and time and that, but at least I get to make the call where I'm going to change things and compromise and move things around rather than just being told I have to drop this or that. So yeah, no, it's good to have that.
Well, it's good to be able to hear that, and with the control and power that you have with it, what made it the right story to follow up the first film?
For me, I didn't want to just do another shark film. It felt like it wasn't going to be enough of a challenge. Like I love sharks and I love thrillers and all that, of course. But and after The Reef, I was presented with lots of scripts, but they're all pretty B grade and nothing that really attracted my attention. And so it was just that, I've been aware of domestic violence and these sort of problems in Australia for a long time. And I went and saw a play about it, and it really made me aware that it was, I kind of just felt this need to try and get the message out there that this is wrong. And at the same time, I surf, and I know that surfers call sharks the man in the grey suit. And so it felt like a shark film might be the right way to, to both have a thrilling ride shark story and also get this other story about, domestic problems and loss and grief out as well. So that was what really made me feel I could maybe write this script. And I got pretty excited and thought, yeah, I'm going to try this. It's more elevated. It's getting, now I've got both a thriller and relationships and themes going on. I sat down and wrote it.
One of the things I always find interesting is how, and you can go back many decades now. I tend to go to Night of the Living Dead as kind of a common point for using horror or science fiction as a platform for these kind of issues. You addressed it a little bit, but using that platform, that foundation, how crucial is it to bring topics like domestic violence and have them, pair against horror, which in this case, the shark is very shocking. So it kind of takes away that little bit of the sting and you're able to get the message out there. Talk to that.
Yeah, I personally, I don't know you, but I'm really attracted to films that do both those things, like, Light of the Living Dead and those sorts of films. Currently or recently, Get Out was one that I really gravitated to. You've got this thrilling ride. You're going, oh, what's happening? Oh my God, so you're entertained the whole way. It's not a lecture or something, but at the same time, it's got real issues that it's talking about. It's talking, in that case, about racial conceptions and thinking and portrayals. So I just think it's great if you can actually really make the two work together, because then you've got a form of entertainment, but it's a thoughtful form of entertainment. It's not just a body count or a gore out or anything like that, which to me is not kind of what I'm into. So it's important to me to try and elevate a script now, and I think if you can do that, if people can do that properly, then you get this wonderful situation where you've had a really interesting hour and a half or whatever, but you're also thinking about it, and it's also something that, is food for the mind.
The change in team, change in crew. I mean, there's time between each film, which in this case is not a bad thing. Sometimes that can be a death nail, especially if the stories are more connecting. But a new DP, new editor, a lot of new faces for this production for you help bring this story to life. How did it help to form it versus what you had dealt with the first film, The Reef?
Yeah, that's a good question too. What was good with this one was that we kind of had the methodology down pat, because the first Reef we were discovering how to shoot it. There were tricks we had to work out and things like that. And in this time, look, it's just the individuals. Like this time, I found the DP really great to work with. He was very, open to ideas and considerate, and he really made sure that he gave me what I wanted. And just, I guess, on that level, just the personalities that you change over. We had a bit of trouble in the sense that we were shooting in Queensland, and at the time it was COVID, and there was a lot of American productions that had come over and they swallowed up all the crews. So we had a
Wow.
lot of we had a lot of trouble crewing on this. We can, you get somebody in a day later and say, sorry, I've had a better offer. So, because the American production's got a lot more money.
Right.
So in the end, it was a sort of a crew I wouldn't necessarily have gone to straight away, but they were great. They were really, really solid. You have to be in water every day. And they really delivered.
Your experience as a filmmaker, your experience in film production, how much did it benefit not only the situation you talked about, but dealing with the challenges of shooting again outdoors and being able to create a film, especially during a pandemic time?
Yeah, I mean, look, shooting outdoors is difficult, as we all know, because the weather is variant.
Right.
Shooting outdoors in water all day, so for 10 hours I was standing in water all day, that's even more difficult because, the wind comes up and all of a sudden there's waves, so there'd be waves sometimes when you didn't want them, and then continuity, and
Right.
we had to work with the tides. So one day we got the tides wrong, and all of a sudden we're all up to our necks, and
Wow.
carrying huge heavy cameras above their heads so they don't get ruined. And because you're walking through all this water, you're wading through. It's just a much more physically demanding thing. So that was difficult. And then COVID, of course, you've got all the COVID protocols, and then, as I said, because Queensland was seen as a COVID safe spot, we had a lot of production, so we had to compete for resources with those productions. It was much tougher under COVID, I think.
Was Queensland the first spot that you looked for when it came to finding the location?
Yeah, because we were going to be in the water a lot and it was winter when we were shooting, I had to be north because that's more tropical. Like where I live in Sydney, it would have been freezing in the water that time of year.
Right.
Queensland was a natural option just for the temperature. And then we started looking around trying to, get somewhere we could work at waist to chest deep most of the time, and also had an open horizon so we could be shooting out into open water. Yeah.
Mark, as a composer, he worked on films like Boar, Charlie's Farm, The Possessed. Having a lot of horror credits, talk about what he brought to the film as a composer, adding that extra layer with the music and the tension.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I personally think thrillers, music and sound is so important in thrillers. Like, if you walk out of the room on Evil Dead and just hear the soundtrack, it's still amazing. But if you walk in and turn the sound down and watch the picture, it's dated. It's like, to me, sound is so important in a thriller. And Mark was fantastic. It wasn't easy. We had a very fast turnaround. He was actually in LA. He's based in LA, although he's an Australian. So we had to do it all by Zoom. But, we got into the groove pretty quickly, and he was fantastic. And I think his score is wonderful. I think it really adds another level to the film.
With Justin, the DP, one of the things I admired about this film is how much footage and how you're able to put things together. What was the coverage like for you when it came to getting, because you talked about continuity and being in the middle of the ocean, obviously, you're going to have your challenges, but it was pieced together so wonderfully. And I'd have to believe between you and Justin being able to bring this together and everyone that you had on the crew for cinematography, it shows. So talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I think there's another person in that equation, that's the editor, Scott. But because they're quick shoots, I usually shoot with two cameras. I love the fact that you're aware that there's a lot of editing and coverage in the film. I'm very much an editor at heart. Like, I believe that you can change the meaning of a film with just a simple edit. So the editing part, not only does it mean I'm out of the water, but I just like it because, you are putting that big puzzle together. So I always want to make sure I've got enough coverage. There's nothing worse than getting in that edit suite and going, I don't have a shot for here. I don't have a shot, or the shot I've got is really, really lame. So I never want to be in that situation. So yeah, we had two cameras rolling, and at times we were also using a little GoPro for some of the closer to water, underwater stuff. We had a proper water housing for the big cameras as well. But so we tried to shoot as much as we could in the limited time we had.
So working with Scott in the edit, sitting down with them, how long did it take, and what was the process like to be able to piece together? Because I'm glad you bring up the aspect of the underwater footage. I thought the blending of the shark, what we see and what we don't see, and then using POV under the water as well as giving us footage of the shark underneath the water was fantastic. I mean, I know it's not anything spectacular. It's not a new trick to be able to do that. But for the Reef Stalked, it really built the tension for me. In fact, there's a particular catalyst scene that I looked at that just the POV of those ladies and underneath the water and the shark coming up It felt like a great pace and a great build to it. So how much fun was it in the edit, and what was that process like to be able to get it right?
Yeah, I don't know if you've edited a film, but it's always like you come in and they've done a compile and you kind of feel like killing yourself or something because it's just not what your film is. The
Right.
poor editor's just been slapping shots together. So, and then you start with that very rough form and you sculpt and sculpt and sculpt. But I'm glad you bring up the POVs because it's kind of funny because, you know, Scott once again would just say, I use POVs a lot more than most people, I think. Like my big whole thing is I want to be in there with the people. I want to feel
Right.
like it's me in the situation. And so I think POVs really do that very well. So yeah, no, I'd tell Scott to chuck in another POV and he'd sort of look at me and roll his eyes. But it was good working with Scott because we're quite different in some ways. And so
Right.
that tension sometimes works quite creatively. Like he'd say something, I go, yeah, but then we'd try it and maybe be good. And likewise him, you know, there was a moment when he said, yeah, no, you're right, Andrew, that works much better. So it's a good collaborative process. And yeah, it's a funny thing editing. You kind of chipping away and you know, we changed the main character's character a little bit because
Right.
when I filmed it, she was much more intense. She was much more, oh my God, you know, freaking out. And Scott looked at me and went, yeah, she's not very likable. So we toned that all down and made her a little bit more about just trying to fit in.
When you go ahead and sit down for this incarnation of the Reef, did the edit change more of the way the characters were or more of the way the story was? Because you look at the aspect of the POVs and the shark and how the buildup is until the final confrontation. But it's interesting you bring up how it changed some of the characters. Which one did it affect more, or was it a balance of both?
Yeah, I tend to think the characters were harder to get right, and we probably played around with them a lot more because there were moments when, like I say, Nick was too over the top, and then the girls, their interaction didn't quite feel right. So we spent a lot of time playing around with the emotional stuff, the relationship stuff. I mean, that's not to say we didn't spend a lot of time on the shark. We did. We spent a hell of a lot of time. But that was more about trying to get the timing right for the jump scares and the tension and all that sort of stuff. Whereas with the actors, it was more about making sure their relationships felt real and true.
For casting, building chemistry amongst the women that are a part of this, can you talk a little bit about that process?
So obviously this is an ensemble with 4 women mainly. That's the main film. And so it was important to get, we wanted to get our lead right first. So we went for Nick. And I just felt, you know, when we saw Teresa's audition, it was just fantastic. She really stood out. And so, you know, I kind of had calls of her and chatted to her, and she came across as someone who could do this. And so we were really happy that we managed to lock her in. And then once we had Teresa, we sort of went around and made sure all the other 4 girls felt like the chemistry was right and it was going to work as our sisters and friends. So yeah, it was based around the central character.
When you're dealing with something like trauma, and obviously these performers are very talented, you know, you talk about the edit to be able to fully form these characters, but an idea of fear and trauma being brought to the table when they're out in this isolated area dealing with something that's terrifying like a shark. I mean, you know, was it a challenge for them to be able to fully wrap their heads around the trauma they were feeling from the deaths at the beginning of the film and working through to this terrible situation? Was that a big challenge point for you as a director?
It was actually quite a challenge because we're trying to get all 4 girls to react differently and give it texture. So how they interact with that was quite complex at times, how each one came to that trauma and how they reacted with Nick's situation. That was, something that was quite difficult at times, but I think they've done wonderful jobs. The lucky thing I have is I make sure that the last 3 or 4 days before we shoot, we're just rehearsing on set. And so we were rehearsing in that little boat and on the kayaks. And I really think that helped. Wonderful thing I like about the film is that they feel like friends and sisters. And so there was that bond. They really did bond over that process. And so I think that was very helpful.
So talk to me about the process of dealing with an entity like that. I mean, was that the biggest challenge when it came to this, to be able to get that right?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's always hard getting that sort of footage because they're wild animals and they'll do what they'll do. And, you know, it's shooting wild footage is a painstaking affair. So it's not easy to get that footage. It certainly wasn't easy to get that footage this time. But I really love using real animals, because to me that brings a whole sense of reality and truth to it, rather than, I mean, look, there's some great CGI out there, but it's usually for much more expensive films, because CGI is expensive. And I had to, because the producer said, "Oh, do you want to do this CGI?" And I kind of looked at it, at the budget and everything. I thought, I don't think we'll be able to do it well enough. So let's go real sharks. Anyway, it's worked before, and why wouldn't it work again? And people really respond to that. So I think it was the right call. But it's always hard working with live animals. Yeah.
Talk to me about the sound. Talk to me about putting together, working with the sound, post-production, and how much did the sound design, everything that came with it, elevate this film?
Yeah, like I've said, I think Thriller's really, the soundtrack to a thriller, is tantamount. It's really important. I mean, we all remember the Jaws theme, don't we? So it's very, very important. It was, with this sort of film, because I'm kind of more interested in the suspense than the action, although they're both very important. So right. Suspense is really interesting. When do you drop the sound out and have just silence? When do you, get the strings to go up? So there's a lot of, talk about that and how to get it right. And like I say, I think Mark's done a wonderful job, and he did get it right. And then the post sound was wonderful. We worked with this mob called Boom Track down in Melbourne, and they just did a great job. They were very understanding and helpful, and the mix is great.
Coming from the first Reef to the second one, what's something you pulled from the first film that you were more aware of in the second film?
Yeah, well, I was very much more aware in the second one. I wanted to make it elevated and have another level of story. Okay. That was the main thing for me. I just didn't want, I love the first Reef, and I think it's a great film, but I feel that the relationships are just all about survival. Whereas in this one, I wanted it to be more than just about surviving the shark. It's more about what else is going on in Nick's life. So that's the main difference, yeah.
And finally, with the release, the massive release coming up, how are you feeling about that? And if I'm correct, it's going to end up on Shudder. So having Shudder as a home for it, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's always great to get your film out there. There's nothing worse than spending 3 years making something. No one sees it. Which is a reality. My last film, Blackwater Abyss, went out during COVID, so they couldn't have a theatrical release or anything. So I'm just really excited that it's getting this attention, and that Shudder's going to be taking it out, and that hopefully people will get to see it.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Andrew, congratulations. It's a beautiful film, and I look forward to the next one. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.